in prayer today are Doreen Benniams, who was very well known in this area. Her husband, Alec Benniams, was vicar at Hayden Bridge, a really good Christian woman who died a few days ago. Please pray for her children. And remember also Thelma Kirkerhead, who worshipped here and who died exactly a year ago. And her son Carl knows that we are remembering her and praying for her today. May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
A couple of years ago, or maybe it was longer, the time passes quickly, I spent a lot of time in the hospital supporting a woman where she was actually from California. She'd become seriously ill when she was on holiday in the north of England, and here she was stranded in hospital in Hexham. It was very clear that she found the culture of the NHS very difficult to fathom. It was something very alien to her. What we found disconcerting was her assumption that the motivating factor for everybody working in the hospital had to be money. She couldn't conceive of anybody doing anything that was work except for money, and she thought she was simply being honest in saying this, but she couldn't understand it. Unfortunately, it meant that, for instance, she thought she never needed to say thank you. The nurses, the others, they were just being paid to do what she wanted, and if they didn't do what she wanted, she complained very loudly. My experience is that our hospitals, our health service, could not function without a considerable amount of goodwill. The staff frequently have to go the extra mile. They are often emotionally invested in the people they care for. Often the thinking of the people I work with is, how would I want this person to be cared for if this was my mother? It isn't just about money. So how did I respond to this unhappy patient? Well, I took in her dirty washing and washed it. I thought, what would my mother do? And that's what I did. I washed her clothes, I brought her books to read, and befriended her to try and get through to her that actually we cared. We weren't just doing this because we were paid to do it. We cared. We wanted to know who she was at the heart of her. I'm not sure how successful it was, but I felt we had to do this. Another memory. As a child growing up in Trinidad, I was very often in trouble with my father. He was a bit of a disciplinarian, and no doubt I deserved to be in trouble. I did lots of silly things. And parenting in the West Indies was, shall we say, strict. It was along the lines of spare the rod and spoil the child. And I was a bit nervous around my dad at times. But one day we were at the seaside. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I'd never learned to swim. I think I was afraid of the waves. Looking back on it, there was quite a lot of surf there. There were rocks out in the sea, and I was jumping from one rock to the other, looking down into the water. Suddenly I slipped. I fell in, and I ended up under the water. I had no idea how to get out. I couldn't swim, and I thought I would drown. My father dived in. He carried me out to the shore. I was sure I was going to be in big trouble for this. But when I looked, I saw that he was cut and bleeding. He was cut by the rocks when he dived in to save me. And in that moment, for the first time, I understood that my father loved me. Jesus describes the hireling, someone who is only interested in his wages, in the money, somebody who would not put himself at risk for his flock, the flock entrusted to him. For the hireling, self-preservation is all that there is, that's paramount. There's no room in that person's life for love or for meaningful relationships. But Jesus says of himself that he is the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd knows his flock, and they know him, they recognize his voice, they trust him, they follow him. He understands his flock because he cares enough to want to understand. The Good Shepherd is not motivated by wages, but by a passion for the sheep. They know he cares, just as a child will know instinctively whether somebody cares about them or not, whether it's action or just words. The Good Shepherd puts the life of the flock and their welfare before his own. There's a relationship there, a relationship between the shepherd and the flock, a relationship of love. You cannot have a relationship with money. It's just a tool. It's a very useful tool, but that's all it is. And if you love money, and there are people who love money, then I believe it will not love you back. It's just a thing. Does that mean the shepherd, any shepherd, doesn't need a wage to survive? Surely not. But it's not his only motivation. A few days ago, I was listening on the wireless to the story of a young doctor in Kenya called Stephen. He would be brought up as a Christian. During the pandemic, which hit and is hitting today every single country, Stephen was caring for patients with COVID. The health system in Kenya is disorganized and rather corrupt. And in that system in which he worked, he was not provided with protection, and his wages stopped. For many months he wasn't paid. His health insurance wasn't kept up. He had to work because he was a doctor. He continued. He did not leave his post. He fell ill himself. He went into hospital where, because he hadn't been paid, he was unable himself to pay for the treatment he had been giving his patients. He died. He left a wife and an unborn child. In spite of the injustice he experienced and the danger of the situation in which he found himself, he did not abandon his patients, because he wasn't a mercenary, he wasn't a hireling, he was a doctor. That was how he defined himself. Christ, the Good Shepherd, moves among his flock today. He moves among his flock in many places. Christ speaks in all the languages of the world. His face is the face of the whole human race, black, brown, white. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd. They recognize and understand that the shepherd loves them. Today, somewhere in the world, this morning, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for the flock, maybe in India, maybe in Kenya, maybe in South Africa. May the Spirit of Christ, the Good Shepherd, be yours and mine always. Amen.